event today. We are fortunate to have the Department of Military Science facilitating our guest speaker today, General Vile, the Commandant of the U.S. Army Cyber School, here with us today. So please give a hand of applause for our This is a true special treat, a great opportunity to further integrate opportunities and partnerships with our national defense professionals. And I'm greatly looking forward to hearing from General Vile and his insights into our nation's military cyber professionals. I would like to pass the introduction along to Colonel Rusli, the department head for military science, to introduce our guest speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Katu. Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for coming today on behalf of the Department of Military Science in Eastern Michigan University. It's my pleasure to be able to introduce and welcome Brigadier General Vile, the 5th Chief of Cyber in the Commandant of the U.S. Army Cyber and Electromagnetic Warfare School in Fort Gordon, Georgia. General Vile served in the Army for over 29 years, first as an infantry officer, then as a telecommunications systems engineer, and most influentially as a plank holder now as a cyber warfare branch professional since 2015. Graduate of West Point, Georgia Tech, as well as a U.S. Army War College Fellow at Carnegie Mellon University. He most recently served as Deputy Director of the United States European Command's Joint Cyber Center. Then commanded the Army's hackers, the 80th Military Intelligence Brigade, and then served as the U.S. Army Cyber Command's Chief of Operations. Sir, thank you very much for taking time, not only for this evening, but for the whole day to come here and visit us at Eastern Michigan University. Big round of big welcome for
So sincere thanks for coming all out, particularly on Thursday afternoon. I know your time is valuable and appreciate the opportunity to engage with all of you. So what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about failure of cyber's role and what cyber's role is in the national defense. Now, in order to have this conversation, really what I'm going to do is I'm going to answer the second question first. What is it we do? Why do we do it? But in order to really understand why it's important, what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to work through a little bit of history for you. So a long time ago, a place far, far away, a guy named Cain took his bayonet, stood it between Abel's second and third ribs, gave it a twist, and warfare was born. So regardless of whether or not you believe the story, the reality is mankind has been at conflict for a very, very long time. And since we began individual combat, we rapidly moved on to groups of soldiers, groups of individuals on the battlefield fighting against one another. And very rapidly, a common theme occurred. How do you do what the military calls command and control? How do you communicate? How do you synchronize? And over the decades, over the centuries, what mankind has done is we've developed ways to synchronize communications on the battlefield. The Romans would have standards. The standards meant something. And a commander could stand on the battlefield and overlook all of his forces, and he knew who was whom, where they were. Why did the British wear red? Why did the French wear blue? Why did the US wear blue? It allowed the commander to know who his forces were and to plainly identify them on the battlefield. Even within militaries, different color uniforms, different types of uniforms would identify different functions. So you would be able to look out and tell the difference between infantry, a dragoon, and cavalry. What's the difference? An infantryman walks on the ground with a gun. A dragoon rides a horse with a gun and then gets off and fights. And then a cavalry fights mounted. And so for the commander to be able to command and control, to take a look and tell people what to do on the battlefield, he had to know where they were because he needed to visualize it. And then what he would do is he would use bugles, he would use horns, he would send messengers in order to communicate and give guidance and give direction to synchronize the maneuver on the battlefield. It's an incredibly important function. So as we go through, United States is born, the United States in 1960, or about, we established the United States Army Signal Corps. This is during the Civil War. During the Civil War, Dr. Albert James Meyer, who was a surgeon, he realized the problem of command and control on the battlefield. And what he did is he developed what you see on the right, they're called wigwags. And soldiers would hold them on the battlefield and they would wave them, and each symbol meant a different letter. And so by doing that, the North was able to do tactical communications on a battlefield filled with smoke that the South couldn't do. What Dr. Meyer also did is he leveraged the telegraph. This was a capability that the North leveraged that the South never successfully did. And what did it do? It ultimately helped enable the victory of the North over the South. Communications. Now, as we roll into the 1870s, we hit something called the Second Industrial Revolution. Any history professors, major two? Please don't correct me. Anyway, so when we roll into the 1870s, first industrial revolution was steam engines. Now we're into the second industrial revolution. Now, the interesting thing about what the second industrial revolution did is it brought all the trappings of what we would call modern warfare. So tanks, what made the tank possible? Internal combustion engines. What did Leonardo da Vinci not have when he was scribbling out the turtle on a piece of paper? He had no way to propel it other than human, not efficient, not effective. The internal combustion engine was invented, and it allowed armored maneuver. It allowed motorized logistics, which helped save the French during World War I. We modernized our artillery. The cannons of old, when you see the cannons in the Civil War or the Revolutionary War, they would fire them, they would roll back. They'd have to roll them back up into position, load them again, reset them, and fire them. By the time we roll into the First World War, they had managed to soften the recoil by using hydraulic buffers. And so by doing so, they increased the rate of fire, they increased the accuracy, all before World War I. The machine gun was invented. In 1870 was when smokeless powder really became a thing. We went from black powder to smokeless powder. The weapons became more powerful. We figured out how to make semi-automatic. We figured out how to make fully automatic weapons. And then off in the bottom right, 1903, Kitty Hawk, we learned how to fly. In fact, the first casualty in an aircraft accident was a U.S. Army signal officer. That was the first person to die in a plane. You don't want to be that guy, but hey, at least I get to tell the story 100 years later. So as we roll into World War I, all the trappings of modern warfare, all the trappings of what we do today were already there. They were already sent. And into World War I, what was our challenge still? Communications. So you can see off on the left, did they have technology? Absolutely. If you've ever seen the wire of old, the wire of old was, made by the lowest bidder, wrapped in natural rubber called gutta percha, and then they would string it alongside of the trench lines. And then if somebody slipped and fell because of the mud and they grabbed it, it would break. It was not reliable. So artillery would come in, artillery would cut the communication. So even though they had telegraphs on the battlefield, you couldn't necessarily rely on them in order to communicate. They did have radios. The first radio put into an aircraft in 1914 had a range of 2,000 yards. Not particularly useful in a battlefield environment. The radios that they developed during World War I for the trenches, they were all receive only. They couldn't transmit, they could only receive. And then if you can imagine the battery technology, think about how long your cell phone battery lasts today. For those of us that grew up, remember nickel metal hydrides? Yeah, those stunk. They were not particularly effective. Now imagine the batteries of yesterday. So anything battery powered really was unreliable on the battlefield, particularly one marked by incoming artillery, explosions, mud, rain, buck, and the worst that you could imagine. So how were they forced to communicate on the battlefield? The answer's on the right. Number one, runner on foot. You would grab the lowest ranking guy, you would write a note, you would hand it to him, and you would hope he would live to deliver the message to the headquarters, to get a response, and to bring it back. Incredibly dangerous job, forced them to run through the trench lines. Many medals were given to the runners of World War I because it was a dangerous but incredibly important profession. They also used carrier pigeons. You can see on the picture in the center, they're releasing the carrier pigeon outside of the tank. That is literally the way that they would communicate. Now, if you can imagine how effective carrier pigeon communication is, put yourself laying in the bottom of a shell hole getting shot at, trying to scribble a little note with a pencil and then tying it to a bird's leg. Not exactly 100% reliable, not exactly 100% effective. But believe it or not, when we jumped into Normandy, we carried carrier pigeons. The United States Army had carrier pigeons, and we had wigwags all the way through World War II, because the technology still had not matured to the point where we had reliable communications. And then, believe it or not, we also used dogs. Tie a message around the dog's neck, give it a hug, give it a smack, and hope it makes it back. Now, all these challenges were almost insurmountable. Communications were horrible. And really what would happen is they would go, as World War I stagnated, they created the trench lines. The French got tied down in something called the Battle of Verdun. Millions died. And so what ended up happening is the British, relatively fresh to the fight. They're going to execute. What they're going to do is an offensive disarm or relieve pressure on the French. Now, the Brits, compared to the French, who had been fighting for a while, they were relatively new at this. But they solved the problem that communications had caused, the lack of communications had caused. And so the British decided, we're going to try to solve this problem. And they invented a technique that they called the creeping barrage. And what they would do is, this is a generic battlefield. You can see no man's land. So if you're attacking from, the south-north, you could flip it around. So we'll say attacking from the north-south. What you had to do is you had to enter no man's land full of concertina wire, shell holes, mud, muck, and people shooting at you. You had to get to the first trench line where they would shoot you from. Then you would have to fight to the second trench line, and then you'd have to fight beyond them. So what the British decided was, what we're going to do is we're going to shell the Germans. And they decided 6 days of bombardment should be enough. Now, to put this into the context, because the numbers from World War I are really tough to contextualize, the big piece of artillery today for us is about 155 millimeters. The big piece of artillery for the Russians is around 200 millimeters. During World War I, they were using what they called siege artillery. For the military folk, we have field artillery. There used to be siege artillery. 400 millimeters plus were being dropped onto the German front lines for over a week in order to destroy them. They dropped it in the no man's land in order to destroy the concertina wire, destroy the barbed wire, so they could easily go. And so as the British planners were preparing for the assault, the assumptions that they made were that this bombardment will be so horrific and so terrible that the Germans will be wiped out. We will be able to put our weapons in sling arms, we'll bring up a soccer ball and then football, kick it across no man's land, and walk into the enemy trenches. And what the creeping barrage was, they would hammer the front line, and then what they would do is they would shift it to the second line and make sure reinforcements and people shooting at you couldn't shoot. So, visually, cognitively, you can imagine you're dropping artillery on the first trench. Now you start dropping on the second trench. Second trench is stuck, so you can attack the first trench. Then what happens is you shift it off the second trench, you attack the second trench and hold, and so on and so on. So you would just take it a bit at a time. Now, the challenge that the British had was, how do we synchronize this? We don't have command and control. We can't trust a runner on foot because he's going to get lost, he's going to get shot, he's not fast enough. We can't trust the carrier pigeon because who wants to be scribbling that little note and tying it to the pigeon's foot? So how are we going to do this? British answer was simple. We will establish a timetable. Since we have no reliable communications, we are going to establish a timetable for the attack. The first wing will be given 1 hour to secure the first trench line. At the end of 1 hour, the artillery will shift off trench line number 2, move to trench line number 3, and they will be given another hour to secure trench line number 2. And we will go and we will go. And that was the plan for the first day. It was written by all the British officers. This is literally what they had. They were all issued. There's 2 manufacturers of the watches, pocket watches, and they would all synchronize their watches, waiting for the appointed hour. And all of the British officers would be given whistles. And today, to this day, when they celebrate Armistice Day, the British still blow these whistles. And so it was July 1st, 1916. 6-day bombardment actually lasted for 7 days because of rain. It did not make things better. And at 07:30, the British officers, staring at their wristwatches with their whistles, blew their whistles. And the British troops went over the top into no man's land, expecting the Germans to be destroyed and expecting to be able to use that timetable in order to siege trench after trench after trench. What happened? Well, it turned out that number one, the Germans had actually dug into concrete, they called them Stolper. They had concrete bunkers underneath the ground that allowed them to survive. So when the artillery stopped, what they did is they sent the lowest ranking soldier up and said, see what's happening. He went up and said, the British are coming. They pulled out their machine guns and they hosed the British down in no man's land. Absolute slaughter. The first 15, 20 minutes was an absolute slaughter for the British. That's bad. What's worse? What's worse is the fact that for the limited successes they were able to get on that first trench line, an hour later, it shifted and they still hadn't gotten all of them. So the German reinforcements were able to come up and counterattack the British. So what ended up happening on the first day of the Battle of the Somme? And if you look at these numbers, understand that the British lost more in the first day of the Battle of the Somme than the United States lost in 20 years in Iraq and Afghanistan combined. More than twice. The vast majority of those in the first hour of the attack. And why was this particularly bad? Why were they unable to make any progress? And the answer really was, it was lack of communications. They couldn't talk. They couldn't pass information. So we moved past World War I, we moved into World War II, technology got a little bit better, radios were more reliable, but we still backed it up with wigwags and carrier pigeons. And then something happens, 1947, anyone know what this is? It's the first transistor. In case you've never seen the first transistor, because there's millions of them on the CPU, that's the first one, created by Bell Labs in 1947. And just like that, the digital revolution had begun. Now, of course, mankind has been at warfare for a very long time. So what did he do? We immediately started integrating into all of our weapon systems. The US did this, the Soviet Union did this, everyone did this. We started to modernize our weapons using digital technology. And we started to use that digital technology in something we refer to as the EMS, the electromagnetic spectrum radio waves, in order to direct the weapons and in order to communicate. We're starting to rely on technology and we're starting to leverage it in warfare. Then 1990, World Wide Web was invented. I started college the same year, graduated high school. That's when the www came out, 1990. And what did that do? That created a new domain. It created cyberspace. It allowed the global transport of information. You could send something from one point in the globe to another point of the globe. This was really what kicked off Amazon, Facebook, Twitter, everything that a lot of the younger folk in the room have grown up with. This is what launched it in 1990. And in that same time, the Soviet Union collapsed. We thought we were going good. Then what happened? 9/11. And the United States entered 20 years of conflict in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, during those 20 years, put the two paths on side by side. This is when Amazon stopped to be in a bookstore and started selling you goods at your house. This is when Facebook was created, PayPal. Name a service that was created in the 20 years that we were at war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, those of us that were in the military, it wasn't lost on us what technology could do for us. And so as we fought the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, what we did is we used the electromagnetic spectrum. We used radio waves, whether it was to a satellite or to another transceiver, in order to move data, in order to move information across the battlefield. In Afghanistan, Ring Road, there's a ring road that circles Afghanistan. We dug in fiber around the country of Afghanistan, not just to help their economy, but also to help us move information on the battlefield. We 100% leverage cyber and the EMS in order to move battlefield data, battlefield information in order to help us fight and win. Now, the interesting thing about this was it was an uncontested fight. The Taliban never jammed us. The Taliban could not take down a cell phone tower, even though if they knew we were listening. Why? Because they actually used it for command and control. They knew the risk. If I talk to Bob, there's a chance they might find me and Bob, but they had to do it. And so they really couldn't challenge us. They most certainly didn't have anybody capable of going toe to toe with the NSA and the cyber. So as we roll out of Iraq and Afghanistan, what were some of the things that we learned? Well, what we learned is that winning or losing the next war, winning or losing with national security, he who dominates the information space He was able to fight and win the electromagnetic spectrum. He was able to fight and win in cyberspace. Is probably going to define the victor in the next conflict. It doesn't matter whether or not you want to go to conflict. Whoever does this is probably going to win. The US didn't just learn this lesson, but the Chinese learned this lesson. And the Russians learned this lesson. And they started building capabilities. They started building cyber armies. So that brings us to today. So what I'm going to do now, hold all that. I'm going to pivot. What is my role? What does the cyber corps do? What does the cyber branch does? Now, what the Army has done is we've created something in FN30 that really defines the way that we fight. And I'll explain the left axis. So the left axis is really what we call the national and theater strategic. National level, what's that? That's President of the United States. President of the United States, Commander-in-Chief, at his level, when he tells us to do something, we have to get stuff done. And then you have the theater level. We call these the geographic command commands. The Army's cut the world into 6 geographic areas, and each of them has a 4-star commander in charge of it. There's Commander Yukon that's in charge of everything that we do with Russia. He's the coordinating authority for all actions with Russia. We have the Indo-PACOM commander, who's responsible for everything dealing with China, everything dealing with North Korea. This is how we've cut up the world. One level below that is operational and tactical. This is where the vast majority of the military resides. These are soldiers on, this goes everything from a 3-star commander all the way down to Private Smith on the battlefield with a weapon. Now, plotted across the top, this is really a spectrum. There's not really necessarily clear black or clear white, but if you really plot this out, on the far left, this is world peace. This is Zelensky and Putin hugging out their differences over a Cold War. All on the far right, thermonuclear war. End of civilization, everybody launches all their nukes, we're all gone. And there's really a scale in the middle. All on the left side, we have what's called competition. This is where the United States exists today. We are in competition, great power competition, with the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians. All on the right side, there's conflict. And somewhere in the middle, there's a crisis. Now, normally, the way Americans like to look at this is there's a clear black line somewhere in the middle. What's that clear black line? Generally, it's when somebody kills somebody else or destroys something else. You know, when somebody dies, there's really no takeaways. You can resurrect them, you can't cross that line. When does that crisis begin? When does that crisis end? It's a relatively narrow area. Now, the interesting thing is, if you think about the Department of Defense, think about everything you know about the Army, think about that slide that I showed, tanks, machine guns, aircraft. Where is that useful? Is it useful in competition? We can go do a live fire exercise with the Poles to show the Russians that we both have machine guns and we go out and talk to one another, that we're willing to fight. It's called saber rattling. And it's called saber rattling because we've been doing it since the advent of sabers. And how effective is it? Question. But the advent of cyberspace in the EMS has given us something new. It has given us a new capability that we can leverage in competition to keep us in competition. So, hold on, there we go. So, cyber branch, what do? We do offensive operations and defensive operations. Why do we do defensive operations? We do defensive operations to make sure our adversary is unable to use cyberspace to gain an advantage so that they can believe that when they cross that line in the conflict, if they choose to do so, that they'll be able to go into it without our command and control systems working, with cyberspace down, with our nation on its knees because Facebook took a dive. That's why we do DCO. And what's okay? What is offensive operations? This is us doing the same to them. Now, what you can expect as we roll into conflict, and if you take a deep look at what happened with Ukraine, as we get closer to crisis, those fights ramp up. The number of attacks against us, the number of attacks we do are going to continue to ramp up as we go closer and closer to crisis. But the role of my branch is to make sure we stay left of that line. What I can guarantee you is that we will shoot every arrow in the quiver. We will kill every electron, we will burn accesses, we will burn millions of dollars a year's worth of work in order to prevent the first soldier from having to die in conflict. That is what my branch does. We fight in cyberspace at the national and theater strategic levels to keep us in competition and prevent us from going into conflict. Now, my branch has two roles. Ultimately, sometimes conflict is inevitable. Regardless of what cyber effects we have thrown at you, I can guarantee you he was hell-bent on invading Ukraine. That was going to go down. And in that case, my branch performs its second role. And this is what people used to call electronic warfare. We now call electromagnetic warfare, but it's easier to think of it in three different divisions that we call. First, electromagnetic protection. Know yourself, know what you're emanating in the electromagnetic spectrum. The interesting thing is, if you cue a radio, a handset, we can see you, we can find you, and if we can find you, we can kill you. So we make sure with electromagnetic protection that we protect our own resources, our own radios, our own combat systems from the adversary. We teach them how to hide. Then we do electromagnetic support. This is looking at the adversary and finding their signals. Where are they at? So if we end up having to go to conflict, that we're able to kill them before they're able to cross, if forced to cross in that conflict line. And then finally, we do something called electromagnetic attack. This is probably what most of you think about when you think about EMU. This is you crank the power amp up to 11, cue the mic, and you jam the communications. We also do what's called special purpose electromagnetic attack, which are finely crafted protocol attacks, not in the traditional sense of EW and jamming, that we're delivering. We won't do that until we're much, much closer into crisis, if not into conflict. So why does Brian Vile explain this? Why do I talk through all this? And why does it seem like I did a history lesson and then followed it up with this? The answer is really simple, because this is what my branch does. This is what my portion of the Army does. We fight and win in cyberspace in order to make sure our stuff works when it needs to and that the enemy's doesn't. And then on the battlefield, we deny them use of the electromagnetic spectrum while protecting our use. My goal is to make sure that today's Army is able to roll into conflict with all the trappings of modern warfare and to make the adversary fight like it's 1916, like it's the Battle of the Somme. My job is to make sure when they roll in that they're forced back to carrier pigeons. They're forced back to run on foot. This is what we do. And we have to be prepared to do this, because if we fail to do this, then our adversary will be that much more likely to push us into conflict, and we will be that much more likely to lose. That's why we do what we do. That's why cyber corps, one of the newest branches in the Army, is important. We are the ones that fight in competition. Somewhere in 4 different locations in the United States, there are soldiers, sailors, airmen, and guardians on keyboards today having that fight. And in my last job, I will tell you about 80% of my time was fighting that defensive fight. We are there today. We fight it today. And it's a fight every American's going to have, particularly as we go closer to. But that's the importance of what my branch does in cyber and in warfare. Now, second half of the question was building cyber soldiers. So I'm the Commandant of the U.S. Army Cyber School. I actually have 4 titles, but this is one most relevant to this talk. So who are we? Where did Brian Vile came from? You heard my bio. Where did Lieutenant Goldsmith come from? Where did Private Jones come from? And so really, you have to figure out, what is it that we need? What does it take to fight and win in cyberspace? What I'm looking for is I'm looking for somebody that's smart. I'm looking for somebody that can think outside the box. Do they have to be a computer science major? Actually, no, because I can train that. Changing somebody's way of thinking is difficult. Teaching them a new skill is relatively easy. So even though we tend towards people that have a propensity for STEM, for math, for science, for computers and electrical engineering, it's actually not required, because I can teach them. That's self-motivated and independent. This is the interesting thing. I watch a whole lot of movies. What's interesting is when you take a look, what most people think of in the military command and control, it's usually a sergeant yelling at somebody, getting in their face. That's what we call counterproductive leadership. That's actually absolutely not the way that leaders are supposed to lead. The way leaders lead is you tell them what you need done, and then you just expect them to go do it on their own. And when they ask why, you explain them why. Because if they don't know why, how can you expect them to accomplish what you told them to do? It's called mission command. von Moltke, the Prussian general, he called it off-drugs tactic. That is the way that good leaders command control in the U.S. Army and in cyberspace. It's absolutely the way. Remember, Brian Vile, I graduated college the year that Java was released. Okay, the first edition of Java was released. Okay, I'm old. I am not going to be the guy on keyboard anymore. So I'm never going to be able to go and sit and say, let me review your work. Yeah, no. No, it's not my job. I'm just going to have to tell them what I need done, my junior soldiers, and expect them to execute violently and execute them. This is the way that we fight, and that's why those are the attributes that are required. So as we go out and we try to find these individuals, for the officers, we interview every single one of them that wants to go into cyber branch. We give them a serious question, give them a series of studies. For those that wish to enlist in the branch, we have cyber assessments. We are forced them to take the ASVAB, which is just a standardized test score. We pay very close attention to who we bring into the branch, and we've actually been phenomenally successful. Not only are we the most selective branch in the United States Army, I'd offer we're the most well-educated, and objectively, we have the highest cognitive scores. Now, what you might not expect is who our average cyber recruits are. Most of you guys, you think, hey, somebody joined the Army probably straight out of high school, 17, 18, 19 years old, decided McDonald's wasn't floating for them. Number one, that's not the Army, and most certainly isn't cyber branch. Depending on the cohort, you can see when you snap the chalk line on this group, they're usually between 23 to 25 years old. 1 out of 4 to 1 out of 5 already has a bachelor's degree. The guy that was manning the front desk when he walked out, who just graduated with a degree in computer science from Kennesaw State, and they have an average GT score of 119. Now, I tried to figure out a simple way to explain GT score, but it's a compilation of a whole bunch of scores from something called the ASVAB, Armed Service Vocational Aptitude Battery. I'd encourage all of you to take it. That's not a recruiting pitch. I would just seriously encourage you all to take it so at least you have that data point. Because one of the challenges that we have today is 2 out of 3 Americans cannot pass the ASVAB to the point where they can join the United States Army as a cook. If that statistic doesn't scare you, I don't know what will. But that is part of the challenges that we have, but fortunately we are still successful with recruiting talent. The second challenge that we have, but I'd offer it simply makes our job harder, but it's the right thing to do. We refuse to lower standards. Just because test scores have dropped for whatever reason, just because people can't pass a PET test for whatever reason, doesn't mean I'm going to lower my standards. I would rather fight alongside those that have the cognitive ability to do the job than to lower my standard and have to work harder in order to bring them in. So now we've brought in some of the nation's best by any objective measure. So what do we do with them? So we have 3 different cohorts, we call them. We have enlisted. These are the people that raise their right hand and come in, start as private specialists, and work their way up through the non-commissioned officer ranks. These are the doers and the small unit leaders in the United States Army. Our NCOs are what we call the backbone of the Army, who are warrant officers. They generally start as enlisted, come in, and then what we do is we make them an inch wide and a mile deep. They get to do the same job for 15, 20, 25 years. These guys are the experts in whatever their niche capability is. And then we have our officers, myself. You have the leadership of the United States Army. Those of us that use servant leadership in order to direct and guide the doers of the United States Army. And then within the branch, we have 3 MOSs, and there's officers and warrant officers for all but one of them. Cyber warfare, these are the people that do offensive and defensive cyberspace operations. We have electromagnetic warfare that fight the EMS. And then we also have what are called capability. What's capability? Well, 5 years ago, it was somebody that wrote malware. We had soldiers that wrote code that you guys would call viruses, Trojan horses, whatever else. They still do that, and they do much, much more. They now are coders, and what they do is 7 different specialties. They develop specially weaponized techniques using code in order to enable our operations. And you can see that's 72 weeks. Now, the asterisks I want to put on, what does 72 weeks mean? That's 72 weeks of 40 hours a week in the classroom. This is not 72 weeks where you go to a class a couple hours a day. This is 8 hours a day, or 40 hours, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. When you have holidays and everything else, the weeks actually stretch out a little longer than this. And why do we do this? Because our job is to fight and win at the nation state level. Now, for those that have had cybersecurity classes, where they break it out all the way at the bottom, you got script kiddies, and then you have cyber criminals. Then you float around at the top, then you have nation state at the top. And generally the guidance when dealing with the nation state actor is all bets are off. Okay, and then there's actually separate charts that show where different countries sit on that chart. We're in the top right. So, we are at the top of the food chain. So the reason why we invest this much time, this much effort into selecting and to training the people that fight this is because we are second to none. We are at the top of the food chain. We consume everyone else. Others may have more mass, but nobody comes close to our quality. So what does it look like? So a brand new soldier comes in, he does 10 weeks of basic training like every other soldier, fires a weapon, carries a rucksack. There's really 5 different blocks, and the 2 that really cover the academic pieces are cyber basic technical core and then cyber common technical core. Now, cyber basic technical core, this only gets taught to our enlisted. Why? Because when the officers come in, we assume that they've been exposed to the vast majority of this, or they're just going to have to pedal faster in order to catch up. So this is 18 weeks, over 700 hours of instruction in those following topics. Okay? So there's a lot of knowledge-based learning. We explain to them what they need to know, but at the end of the day, the vast majority of this is what we call putting them on keys, hands on keyboard, practicing. After they come out of the basic course, then you go into the cyber common technical course. Every cyber officer commissioned into the branch has to make, every cyber officer, every cyber enlisted, every cyber warrant officer has to make it through this course. And this is no joke. 9 weeks, 342 hours. Every day there is a capture the flag event that tests their learning. This is not listening to PowerPoint for 8-9 hours a day. This is an instructor setting the conditions, setting the tone, explaining what you're going to do today, and then you getting onto keyboard and doing it, and then you testing out in the capture the flag competition every day for 9 weeks. Okay, so how do we make this successful? How do we make this engaging? So 3 real principles here. Number 1, this is all active-based learning. This is all doing. We've all sat in class and listened to a professor drone on. That's not what we do. That is not the method of instruction we use. We explain to them and we make them do while we're talking. This is how we teach. This is how we engage. This is a much better learning method than simply listening and trying to internalize. The students engage with the resource. We have full access to the internet. Now, why do we do that? Well, because it's outcome-based evaluation. I don't care how they've solved the problem. I don't need them to solve it my way. At the beginning of the class, I'll show them here's a way to solve the problem. But at the end of the class, I really don't care which method they use. They can use Google, they can find something, they can find another technique, they can develop something with their classmates. Why? Because this is what we want. We want people to find new and innovative solutions to new problems. Now, when we do this in CCTC, this is what's amazing. 125 hours are spent in capture the flag. We have 3 tests. We have the 3 blocks for CCTC. The first test is, I think, 4 hours, and the next 2 tests are 6 hours each. Total of 16 hours of assessments. And that's just to graduate. Now, the interesting thing with this is the enlisted, who 4 out of 5 don't have a degree, and the officers, who the vast majority have computer science degrees from top-tier universities. Number 1 complaint we get from the enlisted who had the basic course in front of this is it's too easy. That is literally the number 1 complaint we get. The number 1 complaint we get from our officers is that it's too hard. So I'm having to stand up a tutor session in order to make it easier for people with computer science degrees from West Point and other top-tier universities. So I'd offer CPTC, our current method, is actually pretty dang effective. Now, the last thing that we do is we call courseware as code. So all of our code, all of our instruction, all the curriculum, everything that we teach, everything we go through is open to anyone. Anyone can see it, anyone can read, as long as you have access to the system. And anyone can update, anyone can propose an update. We run our courseware like Git. So as technology changes, as somebody comes in with a good idea, somebody comes in with something additional to teach, we literally commit that to the coursework. So the next iteration, the next class that goes through CCTC is always going to get the most up-to-date instruction. Now, here's the interesting thing. After graduation, our soldiers come out, they've just spent most of them a year with us at beautiful Fort Gordon, Georgia. What does that enable them to do? Answer, nothing. Not a single graduate we have is still qualified to do what we call work roles. After this, after we're done with them, this is where we get into the specific work roles they have. For the defensive guys, I think the shortest is like 2 to 3 weeks. On the long end, our top tier operators, the guys that are interactive on keyboard and red space, in an adversary system, that's years. Years of training. The school itself is literally a year, but we usually like to get them some sets and reps, get them some experience, in the operational force before we allow them to do that. So this is how we stay on top of the game. This is how we fight. This is how we train. And again, why do we do this? Because I want to stay in competition. I do not want to go to conflict. I have spent, that's what these mean, I have spent time in a conflict zone. I do not care to go back. And I know nobody that wants to go back. So the reason why we train so hard, the reason why we fight so hard, the reason why the nation invests so much in the cyberspace is because we are one of the only tools the nation has that's going to keep us left of launch. So at this point, really would like to transition to any questions that you have. I'll answer any question you have. If you think the answer is going to be classified, probably wouldn't ask it because I'm going to tell you, sorry, I can't answer that. But I've got a whole lot of experience, a whole lot of fields, and I'm willing to go wherever you want to go with the conversation. Yes, sir.
So you brought up the NSA, and the NSA has a lot of stealing information and a lot of defense. But you also brought up that the cyber world would be doing offense and defense. What does defense entail for the U.S. war?
So go ahead and go to slide type 3-1. Great question. Oh, I knew this was coming. All you had to do is type 31. You didn't listen.
Sure, it did.
See, gosh, sometimes you do have to get in their face and down. So straight from the DoD cyber strategy. So what do we defend? This is where it gets really challenging. The only things the Department of Defense has the authorities to defend is the Department of Defense. So if it's a U.S. DoD computer, I can defend it all day long until I see something. No questions. In my last job, I was authoritative. I could tell people shut off a network, shut them on the network, patch this, change this for our new networks. We have a second set of authorities if directed, if told, and we are it's called the sector-specific agency for the defense industrial base and for DoD defense critical infrastructure. So we can be told by the DoD that we are supposed to engage and assist industry partners, military production, military relevant facilities, part of those two. Outside of that, we can't touch it. It's either the DOJ's job or the DHS's job. And how do you defend the nation? So this is where it gets complex. Think of cyber as like archer on archers. We have people shooting at us and we're shooting at them. I can shoot the archer. That's one way to do it. I can try to shoot the arrow down out of flight, exceptionally difficult. But once that arrow enters into U.S. airspace, once it enters in U.S. cyberspace, it's the Department of Homeland Security, it's the Department of Justice's problem. Now we can assist, we can tell them where it came from. The whole the intelligence community, which is much bigger than the NSA, can assist in identifying and solving that problem. We can provide support to them. We can analyze the malware, figure out how it works, talk to industry partners about developing patches, but ultimately protecting Facebook, protecting DOJ.gov, whatever .doj, protecting other sites is not in our job jar, except by doing what we call defend forward. And that's part of the DoD cyber strategy. So does that answer the question about what we can defend?
Yeah.
It's actually the first one.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, sir. Cadet as just coming from a cadet standpoint, some of those top choices, the cyber branch, would you recommend is like one of the best things that you do to prepare for
So what are, yeah, if you know what I'm looking for, and we're actually very explicit, but a lot of people don't read. So for those that don't know, when we interview officers, there's literally interviews that are recorded, and I have a team that goes through those and score those, and we have other series of assessments that we go through and we score you as an individual for a match. We're very open about what the requirements are. The number one thing I'm looking for in an officer is a desire to lead. I have never seen a technical problem that my soldiers have not been able to overcome. We develop codes all day, every day. This is part of the business. We patch networks. We defeat top tier adversaries in the network all day, every day. I'm not wanting for technical talent. My soldiers, my NCOs, my warrant officers have that in finals. I need officers that are willing to lead, and they're willing to lead from the heart. Anyone can stand in front and yell and scream and give direction and say the right. Anyone can be arrogant. You've all seen it in horrible movies that show bad leaders. And that is not the way. I need leaders of character that are willing to serve the soldiers that are ostensibly put under their command. I work for people. And the people I work for are the ones that I happen to outrank. They salute me, but I work for them. That's what we want. The Army, this is what you have to appreciate about the Army. You know, Brian Vile, 29 years. You know, you heard some of my CV. I have options. I can get out. By the way, I think I could retire today about 75% of my base pay for the rest of my life. Pretty cool. No student debt because the government paid for all of it. So I'm in a pretty good place. I could get out, and I actually do know exactly how much I'm worth. Why do I stay in? I stay in because of the opportunity to deal with the soldiers, because they are phenomenal. They are amazing. The stories. So my driver, when I was commander of the 780, my driver, he was, I think, like 35 years old. He had his master's in chemical engineering from Stuttgart University. I can't remember where his undergraduate was. He was a venture capitalist. He flew his own plane on the weekend. He was helping build the Nord Stream pipeline, the one from Russia, whatever. He had a midlife crisis, so he decided to join the Army and said, what's up? So he was getting ready to be an NCO, and what he did is we have this online system. The DoD is an online system where you can get college credits for watching videos and doing interactive click activities. Him and two other soldiers hacked it. He completed, I think it was 1,500 hours worth of training in 12 minutes. Really funny story that they, oh, so what did I do? What did I do in my life? I made him sweep gravel in the parking lot. We do have, punishment for the military. So I made him sweep gravel in the parking lot for 2 weeks, and then I promoted him to sergeant. You have to underwrite the risk, and this is leadership. You have to lead from the heart. It's, I know it's weird. I've seen a whole lot of World War II. Watch every episode of MASH. This is what you just said. It's not the way the Army was. 29 years in, I can tell you what I said is far more accurate to the truth than a lot of books. Watch Band of Brothers. You know the good leaders, and you know the bad leaders. The reason why we watch that movie and tell people which one do you want to be. So answer the question.
Yes.
Looking for leaders. Other questions?
Hey, sir, I've got one. So you're talking about leadership. For cyber officers, like you were an infantry officer, right? Cyber officers roles, they would be like a SOC battle captain. Would they be like an offensive cyber platoon leader?
Yeah, so that's actually a great question. So cyber branch is a lot more fluid than most of the branches. We do have bills within the teams. We do have prescribed positions for the lieutenants. But the reality is we're much more of what skill do you have? What do you want to do? What's my current need at the time? And that's what I'm going to employ you. So we're a lot more flexible than you might think. In the rest of the Army, if you join in the infantry, you're going to be a platoon leader as a lieutenant. And cyber, there's a whole lot of different jobs that you can do. Generally, it starts to solidify around what captain is when, a path starts to solidify. You're generally looking for something as an assistant team lead or a company command. Then a major, it's very clearly team leads. So our majors lead the offensive and the defensive teams. Then after that, it's more traditional with leading organizations. But cyber branch is really much more about talent management. The cool thing is our branch is so small. I know all the battalion commanders. I know all the brigade commanders. There's only 5 general officers. 4 of us are at Fort Corps. We all know one another. So just being able to identify talent, knowing names, is really how we do a lot of that. So it's not quite as cut and dry as I wish. Does that make sense? Okay. Other questions? Yes, sir.
So I want to ask about the program called Cyber Corps. Now, our school is not part of it, but I'm not sure if this falls in your department or no, but do you know how we can, let's say, join this program or any support that we need?
You talking the NSA's,
I think the program, we had it in my old school, it was for master students, so they will be funded for their.
yes, yeah, okay, I know what you're talking about.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have piles of, so the nation needs people that are willing to go in this thing. When I was at Georgia Tech, I had in my program 4 Americans, 31 Pakistanis, 1 Indian, and 1 French. That's not necessarily sustainable from the US perspective. It's nothing against those that come to America and want to live in America, but not all those students did that. So what we offer to individuals is we will offer you, I think we call it the cyber course scholarship. So basically we will pay for your school, but you come to work for us in civilian capacity, because we also hire civilians. Most of the cool stuff gets done by those of us in uniform, but we absolutely hire civilians. I'll have to get you answers on that, sir, but that's something that I can follow back up with. But yeah, those absolutely exist. You can Google it, I'm sure you'll find most of the answers. Yes, sir.
Wanted to know, so I read that, I think, apparently somebody got a direct commission, a direct class in Lieutenant Colonel to the Cyber Corps. And I wanted to know basically, because that's the first time I've heard of, people getting direct commission as major, but as a Lieutenant Colonel, that's a first for me.
Yeah, so what I have, one of the things, Cyber Branch was the first one to stand up. They have what's called the direct commissioning program. What we recognize is that as the branch grows, there are gaps in the force that we can't fill within the force. So there are some skills that are just emerging, some skills that are there that we didn't know that we need, some skills that we haven't been able to grow from lieutenant up. So Congress has given us the authority to, given me the authority to run what's called a direct commission program. So what I do is I put out an advertisement and I say, I am missing the following elite skill. This is not in the force. And I get these from the brigades, from all the tactical people, tell me what they're missing. I put out an advertisement and then people with those skills apply, they compete, they go through physicals, not like physically fighting one another, but you have to be healthy and moving through. And then at the end, we'll do a series of interviews, and those that meet that gap, we will take a look at the number of years experience that they have, and we will offer them to basically skip going from lieutenant to captain to major, all the way up to colonel. So I am actually authorized to hire all the way up to full bird colonel OSEX, 1 step down from a general officer. Most senior that we've hired today, to your point, is Lieutenant Colonel Paul Swan, who's getting ready to graduate from one of our courses, and he'll be taking a position in what we call technical warfare center. Now, so that is an option, but right now the going rate is about 1 in 100 get picked up for that. So out of 2,300 applicants, we picked 23. So very, very few, very far between, and they get commissioned for a 5-year stint. But that is absolutely available if anybody wants to Google. It's called the direct commissioning program. Other branches are starting to do it, but we're the original for the best. And that answer the question.
I guess if I could follow up, you said like about 1 in 100.
1 in 100.
Why is that? Is it just
A lot of it's physical. We have the same challenges. The problem is, as you get older, you tend not to get skinnier or more fit. The other way. I'm a great example of that. So physical is actually a problem for a lot of them. Number 2, a lot of them don't have the skills to the depth that they think that they have those skills. It's one thing to write and say, hey, I'm a Scratch master programmer. And it's another thing to put somebody in front of Scratch and see whether or not they can actually do it. Anybody know what Scratch is? Okay, that was a joke. So you don't know what Scratch is. It's a hack. But we really do want them to regularly make sure that they are that egg that fits that pool, because otherwise we just gave them a whole bunch of rank, a whole bunch more pay, get in the system, and they're still not filling that gap. Make sense?
Yep.
Yes, it's just very, very selective. Oh, wow, lots of questions now.
So you mentioned that you wanted to you're looking for people that lead and not necessarily that technical skill. What kind of learning curve do you expect non-computer science majors to encounter when they go to cyber?
So it's not lead, and you don't have to be technical. So you have to be able to lead in a technical environment or be a technical lead, I don't know that the order of words matters so much. For people that we pick up without a technical degree, it's no joke. Because you don't have CEDs, you don't have in front of that course. Those guys burn midnight oil, they're logged into a lab sitting at home. So they're not just in the classroom, their classmates are helping them out because we actually like that. It's a passion. But honestly, most of the people that have failed are the ones that you would not expect to come. So everybody we've brought in that is non-STEM has made it through. Why? Because they internally have the passion. We actually don't fail out that many. And we never relax the standards. Does that answer your question?
Yes, more so though, like what kind of key concepts do you see that people that are like, let's say mechanical engineering struggle?
So I'm a mechanical engineer. I don't think you struggle. I don't think you struggle with much because if you can make it through the tough STEM, then the reality is a lot of this. It's when the way we step you through it is you will learn. As long as you can drink from a fire hose and not spill it, you're going to be okay. But again, it's not a joke. So Brian Vile was a mechanical engineer. I learned Pascal. And then, gosh, 15 years after graduating college, I had to go learn C by auditing a class at Georgia Tech. Okay, I will tell you, that was a hell of a semester where I had to learn C as a single thing in order to get to a graduate level program, but I managed to make it through. And I have no doubt that anyone that we pick for branch can make it through. If anyone's interested in joining Cyber Branch, we could have some join. It's worst case scenario. I tell you now. It's okay.
So you mentioned hiring civilians. I'm assuming you need that security clearance. How does a civilian go about getting security clearance?
We give it. It's actually the easiest. So USA jobs, we have to, because we're a federal agency, 100% of our jobs are listed in USA jobs. Generally, they're listed as like intelligence specialists. They may or may not have. It's been a while since I checked. I got down to it because to the point, I don't do intelligence work. I do cyber warfare. But we do 100% of our jobs are advertised in USA jobs, and they generally spell out the prerequisites. I highly encourage you, if you do apply to USA jobs, for DoD, my jobs, for anyone's jobs, talk to somebody inside the system first. Why? Because the first scrub for any application in USA jobs is a computer. And unfortunately, the reality is, unless you say I am 10 out of 10 on every single one of these required skills, you're not going to make it through the computer scrub. It's a terrible system. It's based off keywords. It's hit or miss. You really need to find somebody in the community to help you shape that profile to make sure you're accurate so you can make it through the computer scrub. Probably not what usajobs.gov wants me to tell you, but just unfortunately the reality of computerized keyword, key phrase scrub. But all the jobs are there. Once you get picked up for the jobs, for my job, you have to be able to gain and maintain an NSA clearance. That is a step above a TS. So you have secret, you have TS. TS you can get. NSA is tough. You will undergo polygraph as a civilian. So you end up getting a lifestyle polygraph, you end up getting a CI. But it's slow. And there is a bias against people that have foreign relations. I don't think they're that secret about that. There is a great stuff, and it's a good stuff.
Yeah, my cousin got a TS and he explained the polygraph and an extensive background check.
Yes.
A lot of paperwork. Okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
Okay. Ma'am.
We actually have a couple questions from the individuals who are viewing it via Zoom. The first one's probably a pretty easy one. I think it's in regards to your slide about today's cyber recruits, where it talks about the average recruit age of 25. They were just wondering if there was an age limit.
36, I believe.
36. Okay.
I believe it's whatever, I hate to say it's whatever is on army.com.
That'll give them something to go research. And then the other question is, what is the typical composition of a cyber unit? Does it differ from other branches, or is it roughly the same, i.e. platoons of, so many people, et cetera?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. So it really depends on whether it's an offense or a defensive team. So the defensive teams are almost exclusively 17 series, cyber series. The offensive teams have a significant complement of intelligence soldiers that are embedded into flying. So if you know nothing about military operations, we rely heavily on intelligence in order to inform and shape our operations. For cyber, that's no different. So there's actually a bunch of, we call them 35 series intelligence specialists on the team. The offensive teams usually number around 60, the defensive teams usually run around 40, and then we'll break them into smaller groups just depending on mission and man. Yes, sir.
What incentives are being given for members to stay inside the, for competent people to stay inside the organization?
Very well.
What is the retention?
Yeah, so that's actually a great question. So part of the challenge that we have is in terms of the community, we know that our graduates are incredibly valuable when they get on the outside. One of my friends, he was a warrant officer, he did his 20 years, he got out, he lives behind me and makes $275,000 a year, but he doesn't leave his house. So, you know, there's lots of other things that are pulling people away. What do we do? Number one, first and foremost, is we take care of our soldiers. You only hear the horror stories on the news. The reason why you hear the horror stories on the news is because it's exceptional compared to the way that we're supposed to treat our soldiers. Number two, our cyber soldiers are the best paid soldiers in the United States Army. Enlisted soldiers are eligible for up to $1,900 per month on top of their base pay. Does that close the gap with industry? The answer is no. But does it start to buy some of that down and change their internal calculus? The answer is yes. We have the highest enlistment bonuses in the United States Army, and we have the highest enlistment bonuses. You know, again, not here to recruit, you know, but Army.com, you know, I think like $65,000 student loan repayment, initial signings bonus, early shift bonus. We throw money at the problem a lot. But really what keeps soldier in, because we hear about the retention problem a lot. Most people talk about it. Remember, I commanded these soldiers. The number one reason why people stay or leave is mission. They believe in what they're doing. We have studied the problem to death. We have asked soldiers. Number one thing is I like what I'm doing. I like the people I'm doing, and I think I'm making a difference. So that's number one. Money was actually number three. Number two was quality of life. You know, just stop making me do stupid things because it's the Army. It's amazing. You'll hear all these junior officers complain, we have to do so many stupid things. Who told you to do the stupid things? You did. Stop. You know, it's just empower your junior leaders to make change. But yeah, we do absolutely use fiscal, but number one is mission, keep on keyboard, keep them happy. And that's it. That's why I'm still here. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. You talk about the transformation of Fort Gordon and how it's being modernized.
Yeah, so I'll throw out some numbers. So Fort Gordon, like 25 years ago, probably was actually going to be closed. What happened is the NSA decided to put a facility on Fort Gordon, and they invested hundreds of millions of dollars building a new facility there. That saved Fort Gordon. During the war in Afghanistan, we pushed a whole bunch more fiber there because we wanted people out of Afghanistan, and we realized they can watch UAV feeds in the United States as well as they can watch it there. So we started pushing more cable. Army Cyber Command moved there 2 years ago. The headquarters facility is $360 million worth of military construction. The network inside the facility is $100 million. So when we start talking about nation state level tools, this is where those dollars go to. When soldiers come to the workplace, they know that they're valued. Thank you, taxpayers. My headquarters, my new facility, $160 million for the new cyber school, where I'll be able to train at the top secret to secret. It's that top secret is really what jacks up, adds a zero to the end of any number. $160 million for me. They're building a new signal school. So really what the US government is doing is investing heavily in Fort Gordon in order to try to create Augusta as, I guess you call it, one of the cyber capitals of the United States. So lots of investment. Yes,
that would be probably, if I may interrupt, because we passed our time. That would be the last question.
Okay, thank you. So sir, you've kind of touched on it already, but if you could kind of elaborate on some of the opportunities these soldiers go in doing training with industry with the NSA, and then also, I don't know if I missed it, if you touched on some of the certs they get, like ethical hacker, CIS, CCIE, going through their training?
So there's like 73 certs that they can get, industry certs. A lot of it is we care to take the time in order to take the test in order to get and maintain the cert. That's a personal decision, some people do, some people don't. I think it's actually on army.com, it's got 73 different certs. NSA training with industry, we don't do training with industry with the NSA. We got a couple of programs where we intern with them, but we generally like work in their spaces closely with them, so we're already there. We also do training with industry, where we will send people out to radio, we'll send people out to Microsoft, and some of that, and they'll get to spend 18, whatever, a year, 18 months, 2 years, working with industry, contributing to their mission and learning another point of view to bring back and hopefully make us better. So, sir, sincere thanks for allowing me the time. My apologies for going over. Hopefully, anyone that needs to leave left.
No, I think thank you very much for staying because I don't think we went over. I think we went just some of the questions. We really appreciate the extra time. Big applause.
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, thank you very much.
Just take it back.
Send this to you and just a little gift from us. Thank you very much.
And sir, we couldn't let you walk out of here without being able to represent Eastern Michigan. You go back down to Georgia, make sure to wear it over to GA or something, so we're good. Thank you very much.
Thanks. It's my honor.
Thanks, sir.